So we're now going to look at how we make a high-waisted trouser. And this demonstration has been done in the half scale blocks, so we can clearly see that what we're doing. And when we look at this draft, you can see it just comes off the edge of the paper. It's an A4 piece of paper. If you've watched the instructions on how to make the all-in-one trouser leg, the pyjama bottom, you will recognise that we have done something similar here as well, of lowering the waist. So a thing to consider when we first think about this is when we look at the form. By the form I mean the stand or the actual person. And if we simplify the body when we look at it, if this is the waistline, below the waistline the body comes out, hips. So in effect the body goes in and out again. What we're presuming here is the person doesn't have a tummy, or I don't know, what else would they have? A baby. But this is menswear. We haven't got there to that point yet where men are able to carry babies. So we have to remember that the body goes in and out, and that's reflected in our block. So our block goes into the waist to fit. So just always be aware of that. And when we look at this draft, we can see that it's going in and then back out. We need to kind of be aware of that. So there is our back, here is our front. Let's go. And you can see the seat line here. This is the original seat line. So let's start with the front. The front is slightly easier. So a couple of centimetres, 3 or 4 centimetres up, we'll just rule across, and that will become our seat line. So let's pop that on, and we'll draw around it in a colour so we can see the original shape. Okay, so that's the front. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drop the crotch, the front rise, so there's a bit more space. The interesting thing is, you would think that by pulling up or making something high-waisted, you wouldn't need to consider lowering this. And when you look at the pattern process for this in a women's wear context, they don't actually consider dropping the crotch line. But let's do it. So we are going to come down 5 in real scale. So this is going to be approximately 2.5 in half scale, because we're on the half scale block now. So we need to slide that down until we reach that point. And then I'm going to redraw that in a slightly contrast colour. And be aware that you do also need to redraw this so that we get a little bit back there. So why should we consider dropping it on menswear? Because when something sits higher on the waist, it's actually going to pull the whole trouser to sit up a bit higher. And maybe if we're thinking about how a high-waisted pair of trousers is worn, as opposed to fitting in on the waist and being worn with a belt, these pair of trousers might be worn with a pair of braces. And so they are not fitting at the waist, they're fitting from the shoulder. So everything is being pulled up. And what we need to be aware of is space, so that you don't get a moose knuckle or a camel toe or whatever you might want to call that when there's not enough space for the guy's junk. But if you don't do it, ultimately it'll be a bit uncomfortable for the person wearing it. And if you make something that's uncomfortable for somebody to wear, as much as they love it, it will always sit in the back of their wardrobe because they're like, nah, not today. So that's the front. And we will do the same process with the back. So we will place on the seat line. So let's put the seat line on. And let's draw around that. And we'll draw it in the orange line initially to show the original shape of the block. And we will keep the dart on it. The dart's going to be part of this. And we will come down the centre back. Notches. And then down into the rise and then the inseam. So let's just draw the dart in. So on our block in real scale, that's approximately 2 centimetres. I haven't drawn the top in. And then the next thing, repeating what we've done on the front, is we're going to measure down 2.5, so about 5 centimetres in real life. We're going to slide down. So if we were sliding down, we would be trying to keep this on the grain line. We wouldn't be going off grain. So we'll slide down. And then we'll draw around that. So remember, off camera here, I'm drawing down the side seam because that has changed as well. And then I'm doing the front rise. So that's the front, that's the back, and there is the front. So going back to this original beautiful sketch, in, out. So we need to do the same. And the front is particularly easy on this style of block. If we look at the style of block, it's very straight. Sometimes, even on a menswear block, the front has a bit of a curve to it. If we did have any kind of curve here, we would want to equalise that out. So by that I mean drawing a straight line between these 2 points, so this line becomes straight. And in fact what I would do is I would just draw a line, a guideline on for you. And that's the same on the back, and the back does tend to be more trickier. There tends to be slightly higher bits here, and where the dart has been trued, folded out, it might have changed the shape. But again, what we would do is we would be putting a line that is completely straight. And of course, what that creates is a fold line, or a reflecting line, or a mirroring line. And so, depending on whether or not you've got the right kind of paper, we would want to fold it either towards us or underneath us so that we can trace through. And so if I bring back in the front, you can see I folded that and then I've been able to reflect that up. So we get something like that. One other thing that I considered is that I've also squared up straight there so that we get a little bit more width on the waist, a little bit of extra length. That would probably be about a centimetre, because again we're not aiming to fit too tightly into this waist, and as we travel higher up, even if the person is at the most perfect weight, the body does curve around here. When you eat, when you breathe, when you sit, you need some space. And so the same could be said for here as well. We just might want to square that out. Ultimately, when we're fitting this pattern, we could always bring it back in. but it's good to have a bit of literally breathing space. And so we would do something similar on the back as well. We would probably bring the centre back rise out by about 1 centimetre in real scale, and also the same on the hip, so we get a little bit of space. Try and error with this particular pattern, because how high we go is going to kind of affect it, but there is a kind of rough limit about how high we go, about 6 to 5 centimetres in real scale. And so in this half scale, you can see that I've brought that up 3 centimetres. And the same on the back. So there are a couple of other changes that I've made on the back once we've copied this through. So this is 3 centimetres, but I've brought it up a little bit more, so there's just a bit more height in the back as we are going a bit higher this time. There can be things like the fact that the bum comes out and the back comes in. That is like the very best shelf bum going. You could put a cup of tea on there, but this is giving us a bit of length. And if again we think that in this section we might have a button that's pulling up the braces, a bit of extra length would be helpful. And at the moment I'm keeping the dart very square up, so it's approximately 2 centimetres all the way up. You could narrow it back in, but again this is going to come down to fitting and stuff. If I was making a toile of this pair of trousers, not only would I be putting more than 1 centimetre seam allowance, especially on the back, so that I could fit, I would mark on the dart, but I would either on a very wide stitch or hand tack in the dart, or just pin them in on the dart and see what they need. They might need maybe 2 darts. If for some reason this person needed a much wider dart, so bigger than 2, if we're talking about 3, maybe 4 centimetres, we would think about splitting that dart value in half as well. Joking aside about this type of shelf being able to put on a cup of tea, there is a thing called a swing back, where the back swings back in, or a deep back, and so that's why we might need to fit in more. So that is the basic principles of a high-waisted trouser. If you wanted to go much higher than this, it's almost creating a corset. And so you would have to think about structure in this, because what would happen is the garment would start to roll over and move over. So we might need to think about putting some canvas or something in. It depends what kind of look you're going for. But also it might begin to look quite theatrical if you go very high, and it might not necessarily be a practical garment